Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wondered what happens when a Zoomer who grew up on the Clone Wars,
a millennial Anakin defender,
and a grumpy old Gen Xer walk into a cantina to talk Star Wars?
Then we've got the podcast for you.
Star Wars Generations is a place for fans of all backgrounds to come together, talk about why we love the franchise, and what we can learn from each other.
With so much new Star Wars content coming out, we take a deep dive into all of it. We talk stories and characters, what we learn about the Force and the Empire, Republics old and new, and how each story adds to the larger picture.
Besides episode-by-episode coverage of the new shows, we've been going back to watch the movies in release order. We talk about Star Wars novels and video games, along with fan content and cosplay.
And with each episode, we're just starting the conversation, and we hope you jump in. We'll read your feedback, answer your questions. We've even had full episodes dedicated to questions raised by listeners like you.
You can find us under Star Wars Generations on your favorite podcast app, or by going to theethicalpanda.com. May the Force be with you.
Now this is podcasting.
Hey there, true believers. Andy Nelson here from the Marvel Movie Minute podcast with the rest of the team.
Pete Wright, Kyle Olson,
Rob Cabasco,
And Matthew Fox.
This is the podcast where we dissect the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time, exploring every detail of this epic superhero franchise.
In our season looking at Iron Man 3, we're going to mix things up a bit.
That's right, Rob and I are your guides, but instead of our usual minute-by-minute format, we dive into 5 minutes of the film in each weekly episode.
It's a totally new approach, but one that still allows us to explore all the depth and detail that makes these movies so special, even if Iron Man 3 isn't all that special.
Hold on, that's where you're wrong. Extremist, Shane Black.
Yeah, would you like to look at the Mandarin and Maya Hansen? Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a die-hard Marvel fan or just love deep dives into movies, there's something for everyone on Marvel Movie Minute.
Suit up and join us on this epic audio adventure. You can find us at truestory.fm or by searching Marvel Movie Minute on your favorite podcatcher.
Because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every minute is packed with excitement.
Enough said.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we are talking about hope. Hope that Superman can embody. Hope that this will be an interesting podcast discussion based on only 2 minutes of trailer. Hope that this will be a Superman that might actually make Jessica Plummer say this is something like the character that she fell in love with in comic books and that all the rest of us should have been waiting for, despite my love of Christopher Reeve. So yes, we're talking about the newest Superman trailer. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about heroes with bad haircuts, but we're mostly going to be talking about the character of Superman and what does this new image of Superman that James Gunn is possibly going to be giving us, how does it relate to the character from comics? How does it relate to other versions? And most importantly, why is this one we care about? It's myself, Matthew, my normal co-host, Riki, and of course, Jessica Plummer, returning guest and comic book fan extraordinaire. Jessica, how have we been doing?
I've been good. How have you been doing?
Pretty well. Been exciting couple of weeks. We took a hiatus for a couple of weeks over the holidays. Glad to be back recording and glad to have you on. Riki, let me first start with you. What do you know about Superman, or what's been your relationship with this character?
Just in general?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a fan for a long time.
Mhm.
Comic books, movies, TV shows. And I think last time the three of us got together, my kind of thesis was that Superman is a good TV show character because it allows Clark Kent to really be the focus of the story.
Right.
Whereas a Superman movie with so much focus on action, you have to center it around Superman, who some people have derided as a boring superhero, right? Like you can't make Superman interesting because he's invincible. So you have to come up with some conceit for why he's depowered or why the opponent is more powerful than him at the moment. So I'm curious to see what this movie does with Superman in that regard.
Yeah, and I would say that was one that really had me convinced because I think you're right. I loved the Christopher Reeve movies as a kid. Those were my Superman. As I've discussed, my father sued Superman, which was fun to say on the playground when I was 5 or 6. But as I grew up, I definitely was that kid who was like, "Oh no, Batman's so much cooler." And I think part of it is you're right, and I hadn't really thought of it until we had that conversation that in a traditional superhero action movie, the main question is always, can our hero defeat the villain in single combat? And his legions and his big monster, whatever it is. And it was Superman. If that's a character where kind of the point is that that's not actually a real question, then there's a whole other set of stuff that we don't really normally get to explore. And so, Jessica, take it away from there. Kind of talk a little bit about how that idea we're talking about, but also just other ideas for you. What's the essence of Superman that we maybe haven't seen on the screen very often?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely 100% agree with Riki. I think Superman does better on TV, both because they have a lower budget, so they have to use Clark more because it's easier and cheaper, and because the character is so designed for ongoing storytelling. Like that's comics are sequential storytelling. So 100%, like I've said on this podcast that my preferred genre for Superman is a workplace rom-com, which is what most of the TV shows have been, and you don't really see that with a movie. And so I do think that, look, we don't know until we see the movie, but I am choosing, the episode is about hope. This episode's about hope. I am choosing to hope that the fact that we have seen the whole Daily Planet staff, except Perry, I think, in the trailer means we're going to get lots of Daily Planet scenes. We're going to get that emphasis on that part of Clark's life. Because I think that's what's one of the major things that's been missing in Superman movies up to this point. We haven't seen a lot of Clark. And like you were saying, framing a movie around, can Superman beat this guy up? Yeah, yeah. Of course he can. He's Superman. And so, yeah, I'd love to see more Clark. And I'd love to see
the supporting cast. How do you have Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White and then just not use him at all? Pretty much.
Exactly. Those networks of relationships, if Superman is this, friendly, warm, approachable character, he should have relationships. He should have relationships with his family, with his coworkers, with his wife, obviously not his wife yet in the movie, with the people of Metropolis, with his dog, and other superheroes. And it seems like we're going to be getting that in some form in this movie.
Right. Yeah, the inclusion of the dog, I know, is something that's tripped up a lot. The inclusion of the dog, I know, is something that's kicked off a lot of conversation online, and I kind of don't get how anyone would not be in favor of it. I think the movie that came out not that long ago with Kevin Hart and I think The Rock may have soured some folks, as that was not the movie was about Crypto and Batman's dog, the name of which I forget.
The Super Pets movie.
Super Pets, which was not the best necessarily. Some people loved it though, and that's great. But yeah, to me, it just, that one scene especially really seemed to feel like this is going to be a more lighthearted, not that I'm sure there's going to be some seriousness involved, but that it's going to be a little bit more of the rom-com, a little more of the comedy of, a person attempting to live this double life of being Clark while being Superman, instead of it being about wham bam, look at the great majesty of the Kryptonians as they fight for the soul of Earth or whatever it is.
Yeah, I will. My one tiny criticism is, it's not even a criticism. I just this is what's going to happen in 2025. Everything's going to be CGI. But imagine if they had gotten a dog actor and they got to go on their press tour and the dog is sitting in his own little chair and we've lost something.
I had that
full CGI.
I mean, I don't mean this critically. He looks CGI to me, the way the fur is, but maybe there's a real dog. We've only
my
seen
understanding is that animal actors are not always treated the best, and so there is there's some reason of moving the CGI as a way to be better to the actors, but also that would I would hope there is some dog at some point that is doing some of that and also being very well treated though.
Yes, and getting treats for doing stunts.
So we'll see about that, but talk about what else from the trailer kind of gives you some thought of what direction we might be going in with this and why it might be a good one.
I mean, the thing that really got me, because I am on the record as being self-protective about this movie. I love Superman very, very much. I as you mocked me for, have been kind of a downer about most Superman movies. I do think Christopher Reeve did a good job. It's just that's a pre-crisis Superman, and I'm a post-crisis gal.
That's fair.
I had a lot of hope with the first Man of Steel trailer, and then the movie turned out to not really be what I was looking for. And so I told myself, don't get excited just because the trailer looks good. You could be disappointed again. Like, don't get your hopes up. And then there was that 1-2 punch in the trailer of like Krypto showing up, and then it cuts to Superman saving a little girl, and I was like, all right, James Gunn, you've got me. Like, that's all I want. I want him to love his dog and take care of those weaker than him. That's it.
Maybe we can clarify for listeners real quick what you mean by pre and post crisis, because I'm familiar with comics. There are multiple crises in DC. So what specifically are you telling us with that phrase?
So in 1985, DC decided to drastically revamp major aspects of their universe. And one of the things that got a really significant makeover was Superman. They did this by telling a story called Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so everything before that is considered pre-crisis, and everything after that is the post-crisis universe. And as you've said, there have since been further reboots, and so we got the New 52 universe, and we got the Rebirth universe, and like it's that line from Pacific Rim of like, these happen more and more frequently, and soon we'll be seeing one every 30 seconds or whatever. Yep. But the changes to Superman have by and large really stuck, even despite those other reboots. And the major shift was before 1985, Superman, or Kal-El, was the real person. Like, he landed on Earth with full memory of Krypton. He identified as Kryptonian. Everything about it, like, Clark Kent was a disguise. That was a mask that he put on to move among humans. From 1985 on, he did not develop his powers until puberty. So he was raised as a human by humans. He identifies as Clark Kent. And it's not that Superman is a disguise so much as that it's the outfit he wears so that he can do his job. But he's much more, obviously he's biologically the same amount of Kryptonian as he's ever been, but he's much more human personality-wise. And that there are all sorts of other like little details of Superman's life that are either pre-crisis or post-crisis, but that's the major change. Like, are we looking at somebody who thinks of himself as Superman or Clark Kent, Kryptonian or human? And it does seem like the movie is kind of juggling that question, which will be interesting. And I have my opinion, which we'll see where the movie lands.
Yeah. And I really like that phrasing, especially because one thing that, if you heard Jessica on the podcast before, we've talked about a lot, is that idea stands very much in contrast to, for example, Batman, who I think, and this is a theory I got from the folks at DC On Screen podcast, but I really think holds up, that in the best tellings of that, Bruce Wayne is a character he invents so that people don't lock him away. He is Batman. Like, that is what his psychological profile is. And that I think some of the best episodes of the Justice League cartoon, or the Justice League animated show, I should maybe say, that are really about conflicts between Batman and Clark Kent. And I say those names very intentionally because they kind of clash, because Batman doesn't understand that Clark mostly wants to be Clark and then put on the cape to save people. And Clark doesn't understand that Batman doesn't want to actually mostly be Bruce Wayne, and vice versa.
Yeah. There's a line from the Lois and Clark TV show from the 90s where Clark says, and this, to me, this is like, he says, Clark Kent is who I am. Superman is what I can do. And for me, that has always been like the high water mark for understanding the division of the character, at least as I interpret him. But now that you said that about Batman, I think it's very funny to flip that on its head and say, like, Batman is who I am. Bruce Wayne is what I can do, which is actually pretty fair because Bruce Wayne is the one with the money.
Yeah, and then the critique that's often raised now of like the best way to stop crime is not to punch poor people who are turning to crime, but to give those poor people better alternatives so they don't have to go work for the Riddler. But that's a whole other story. Well, and to talk about that, I think I had a similar reaction to what you were talking about the moment where he saves the little girl. And what really struck me was you were showing his power not in his ability to punch, not in his ability to fight, but in his ability to protect. And Riki, for me, it really struck to a line in Star Wars that I know you and I have talked about a lot, that we don't fight to destroy the things we hate, we fight to protect the things we love. For either of you, talk about kind of what that scene means in the trailer and kind of what we think it's saying about who Superman is.
I think that scene is everything.
Mm.
And it's a struck a similar chord as maybe the first episode of Superman and Lois, the TV show on the WB that just wrapped up, where they put him in the classic like holding the car pose from Action Comics 1, and then like he has a conversation with a kid. I think the kid
Uh-huh.
like compliments as soon as like, thanks, my mom made it. And it's like, yes, like that's
Yeah.
the Superman I love. And this, yeah, the scene you mentioned does give similar vibes, that he's using his immense strength to protect our most vulnerable. And like that to me is like what Superman should represent. And it, you said we're not going to bash the Snyder movies, but I believe it stands in stark contrast to the way Superman acts in those movies, often like callously destroying buildings and ultimately harming people in his battle with Zod. And it,
Mhm.
it took until Batman v Superman where it's actually Bruce Wayne who's the one that's like taking care of the people on the ground, which is just like such a wild contrast to me.
Well, he does until he decides to just hit them all with his tank. Like,
Right.
uh,
Practicalities. And yeah, and just to be clear there, I think I'm definitely on record as not being a fan of the Zack Snyder interpretation of a lot of these characters, especially Superman. I think right now the internet is full of a lot of people being like, yay, Zack Snyder, the hell with this, or yay, James Gunn, which means the hell with Zack Snyder. My view is, look, a lot of people loved Zack Snyder's interpretation, and it wasn't my favorite. I'm guessing it wasn't your favorite of either of you two. And I don't think it has to be all about like which one's better, but I think we can talk about that was one particular direction for the character. And as Riki said, this is a pretty stark contrast. And
Yeah.
I think
I
it's
mean,
okay for folks
I'll
who
say
didn't.
it. I'll say that this is better in that it aligns more with my belief of what Superman should be.
Yeah,
And like that can differ from other people's belief, but in terms of my perspective, I'm just gonna say it's better. Like I don't care.
that's fair. That's really fair.
yeah,
It's certainly one that
I
I'm a
can't
lot more
argue with
excited
that.
for.
Um,
But I am concerned. Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
oh no, I was just gonna say, going back to the scene of him saving the little girl. I think comparing it to that moment in Superman and Lois is such a perfect
Mm-hmm.
comparison, because right after he saves the little girl, we also have that moment of the little boy who's like putting up the flag with the Superman logo on it. And
Mm.
that also, like, I've seen a few, I wish I had the links. I will never be able to find them, but I've seen a few posts like with people talking about Superman recently, especially in the wake of the trailer, how Superman is a power fantasy, but he's not a power fantasy of being able to do whatever you want or to hurt people or beat anybody up. He's a power
Mm-hmm.
fantasy of being able to affect positive change, of being able to protect people who need it, which I think a lot of people right now, for various reasons
Mm-hmm.
that we don't need to get into, may be feeling that very much. And to me, Superman has always also been a point of inspiration, like the fact that he
Mhm.
is this. He's not a Clark Kent is, to me, is not a nerd like Peter Parker who gets bullied. He's
Right.
just anonymous. He's forgettable. He blends
Mm-hmm.
into the crowd. Like that scene of him navigating the busy streets in Metropolis and like people not notice. He goes unnoticed. To me, the metaphor of Superman has always been that we all look like ordinary, mild-mannered people, and we all have this capacity for great good. And
Yeah.
so to see him save a child and then inspire a child back to back
Oh, that's a great point.
is so, like, I'm getting chills now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so
Yeah.
good.
And that reminds me of a similar scene at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the Andrew Garfield one, where Spider-Man is like taking a break, but then a kid wearing a Spider-Man mask like
Yes.
stands in front of the Rhino, right? And then
Mm.
Spider-Man shows up and he's like, "Thanks, kid. Like I got it from here." But yeah, like inspiring courage, inspiring hope.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
And
is an important role for heroes like this.
And I'll say that stands in marked contrast to the person who is normally the one I'm always saying is better than Superman, but in this case, I think isn't. Because if you think about in The Dark Knight, which I think is probably the preeminent Batman movie, except maybe for Robert Pattinson Batman, which is something I never thought I'd be saying. But in that, when people try to be like, we're inspired by Batman, we want to do the same thing, he's like, no, go away. I don't want you here. And partially that's because you can't do what Batman does, because Batman can do what he does because he has all that money. And and I think you're right that there's an extent to which, yes, if I jump in front of someone who's getting maybe hit by a car, I'm not going to come out of that quite as well as Superman might, but I still can try. I can still, and there's 8 million other ways in which I can, when someone who is not like me is getting bullied at school or at my work or is not getting listened to, I can say, hey, maybe, that person we keep shutting down, like, they had a great idea. Let's listen to that. Like,
Yeah.
to me, I think that's one of I love these stories as metaphors because, yeah, it shouldn't be about, Superman can punch Zod in a way I never could, but it can be about, Superman can use his ability to protect people. Well, what are my abilities? What are the privileges I have? What are the resources I have? How can I use those to protect people who are being attacked?
And that's why he's a reporter. Like,
yeah,
that job is not an accident.
and go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, in real life, we don't have Superman, but I live in Los Angeles, and we're dealing with horrible wildfires right now, and the brave people of the fire departments around the city are going out and staring death in the face and doing amazing things. I can't do that. I'm not trained for that, and I shouldn't do that. But from the fringes, I am like thinking of like, what can I do to help people, not maybe directly, but indirectly,
Right.
with volunteering my time or donating money. Like, those things are important. And so the people who have the great ability, like, going back to Spider-Man, like the ability to inspire, I think, other people to do what you can within your own means is absolutely tantamount.
And I mean, because you're going on that, like, you're right. Like, unless you have that good training, you shouldn't be fighting a fire.
No,
But
absolutely not.
I know that, with all these people evacuating, because I'm on a lot of disability lists, I'm seeing a lot of great stuff about, like, regular citizens, going out to help their disabled neighbor evacuate who might not be able to, or just, there's gonna be a lot of people living in FEMA camps for a while after this, or otherwise needing help, and like packing a bag of groceries to send to someone, or whatever it is. Yeah. So that kind of thing I really love. And going to what you were just saying there, Jessica, on the one hand, we live in an incredibly politicized world right now, as we've been seeing. If you look online, even just the fire itself is getting very politicized, but whose fault it is and all this kind of stuff. And I think people know where we. Yeah, I'm gonna take a. And as this podcast goes on, there's other times where I'm going to bring that up, but there are ways in which I'm really curious how this movie is going to stand in that regard, because even something as simple as being part of the press is so politicized right now, in terms of people's opinions about the media. And, Clark Kent and Superman, peace, justice, and the American way has always been very wrapped up in Americana in a way, I think, even more so than Captain America, who's literally Captain America. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I was doing a bit of research on this recently. Originally, the American way was not part of that tagline. So that line, Truth, Justice, and the American Way, comes from the Superman radio show, which started in 40 or 41 or thereabouts.
When we were in a war. Well, no, actually we were not, but go ahead.
It depends on exactly. It wasn't December 41. So we were not quite at war yet. And so it was Truth and Justice. There was also a bit in that opening. It was like the same opener, the equivalent to a theme song,
right,
for every episode. And that was also where we got like Faster Than a Speeding Bullet, all of that stuff. One of the things that was in there that we don't hear a lot anymore was Champion of the Oppressed. But what was not originally in there was And the American Way. That got added after we joined the war. And it eventually, because that show ran for into the 50s, eventually they took it back out. And in the 1948 serials, so those were like short serialized episodes of
Uh-huh.
like you would go to the movies, and before the movie they'd play like an episode of Superman basically. In the serials, Pa Kent actually tells Clark that he has to stand up for I believe it's truth and tolerance, like, and there's no American way. Like the we do think
Interesting.
of that phrase with Superman, and I'm certainly not going to say that he's not very associated with Americana, because obviously he is, and there was a
Mhm.
whole controversy about a decade ago when he like renounced his American citizenship and people freaked out or whatever.
Right.
But that phrase has been used at very specific points in history for political reasons.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, when you started saying it was added, my first thought was that it was going to be added during the Comics Code 1950s days, when we were trying very hard to make comics patriotic. So,
No, you'd think. I mean,
yeah.
that would be a good guess.
Well, that's just my point, is that I think and already, I think there's a lot of people making the point that I would definitely agree with, of like Superman's an illegal immigrant as a way of thinking of him, and other people, claiming on Elon Musk's side, and other people claiming that like Trump and other people claiming that Superman is this epitome. Yeah, one more time. And other people claiming that Superman is the epitome of conservative values. A claim that I do not think holds water, but is certainly out there. And my point being that I can tell that the conversation about this is going to be incredibly politicized, and I'm curious to see to what extent Gunn either is seen as making a point, or is making a point one or the other, or tries to make the movie very, very much not making a point, which could be kind of a failing of just not saying anything. So it's something I'm going to be curious about, because as you said, it seems like, there's always, if everything is political, everything is making a point, but Superman especially has always been a statement of some kind, whether it's from two Jewish men in the 30s wanting to create someone who stands up to evil landlords and union crushing bosses, to in the 40s of wanting to have an epitome of America in a time of war, to the 60s and the 70s, and all the way up to today. Because I certainly think that idea of like, and we can talk forever about like, what American ideals versus American actuality or whatever, but like, I certainly grew up at a time of learning like, what America is about standing up for the little guy, and like protecting those who need protecting from the menace of communism, because it was the 80s, but like that, it was those ideals. And so I think for a long time I rejected Superman, because it felt like, oh, American propaganda stuff. And now, at a time when there's a lot more discussion about like reclaiming that sort of thing, it's just all sort of reasons I'm interested to see where they go with it.
Yeah, and I also think with a character like Superman is bigger than any individual Superman story. And there was something, I want to say it was at the end of last year, there's something going around where people could vote on whether they thought certain fictional characters were Republicans or Democrats.
Oh my
And
gosh.
oh yeah.
I remember
and
that.
I don't think Superman was actually on there, but Captain America was, and it was right down the middle, because Captain America in the comics is very left-leaning. If you read the comics, he's very left-leaning. Like, read the stuff that was coming out around Watergate. But if you are thinking about Captain America as a symbol, as an icon, as a guy in a costume you could take photos with in Times Square, he's a litmus test for what you personally believe America should be. And Superman functions very, very similarly. So, yes, in the actual text of the comics, and of course, we're talking about 87 years of comics now, so there is a range of how he behaves. But in the text of the comics, he is an illegal immigrant and a journalist, and those have implications for what he would believe. But as a larger than life icon, he is going to be whatever you personally think is good.
Right.
And I think a lot of where Superman will be positioned as a political symbol in these movies is going to depend on Lex Luthor. Because especially like Superman's immigrant status is most highlighted by Lex Luthor, like when he's making a presidential run or something like that. When he's trying to gather more political power, he highlights that Superman is not one of us, as in, like in this case, a literal alien.
Right.
But that obviously has very like real world implications. And
Mhm.
so I'm very curious to see what this Gunn movie is going to do with Lex Luthor, who I just learned is going to be played by Nicholas Hoult, which is
Yep.
fascinating. I just saw a screenshot of him
Mhm.
without the hair, which is good. Just start him out. Don't have a weird explanation for why he loses his hair. Just have him start out bald, because that's how we know Lex Luthor. So good.
I will say that while I love Jesse Eisenberg as an actor, his version of Lex Luthor in
It
the
was
Zack
weird.
Snyder movies is probably the one that was the most like hashtag not my so and so. In part
When he
because I thought
makes that guy eat a Jolly Rancher,
Yeah, that's exactly
like
what I was gonna say.
he
I
was
was
what?
like,
he was
what?
just being a dime store Joker. Like it was just
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was a very the Joker's a great villain, but the Joker's the Joker. Don't make the Joker into anyway, so I'm just hoping for something very, very different from that.
I mean, for me, the performance will always be Michael Rosenbaum. Like, I will never say Smallville is the best Superman story out there, but Rosenbaum's Lex is. He's so good.
I'm about halfway into season 1 when I'm still not sure like to what extent he's nefarious or to what extent this is his origin story and he
Oh, he's
genuinely
kind of not at all. Like,
well, the thing is, so far he's very convincing as Lex. He's very convincing as a rich kid who's trying not to be so privileged. What he's not doing, he's not very convincing as a high school student because the actor's like 30 when the show
oh
is
well, he's
being made.
not. He's in his 20s,
Yeah.
which makes it especially weird that he meets a 14-year-old and is like, "I'd like to buy you presents and invite you
Mhm.
to my house." Like,
He's just
I
trying
mean,
to be Doc Brown.
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, he has a lot of the trappings of like here's my thing for Lex Luthor. I want any Luthor to be constantly swirling brandy in a snifter while listening to Wagner, and maybe lying on a tiger skin rug in front of a roaring fire like that. Like I want everything to smoking a cigar like that is what I want from any Luthor. And Michael Rosenbaum does that all the time, and he says everything in a really sinister way, but he's actually just a super nice guy who Clark is terrible to. It's like a really
Yeah.
bizarre dynamic.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it's funny 'cause we're talking before about punching the ultimate heroes and stuff, the ultimate bad guys. My Lex is always going to be Gene Hackman because that's who I grew up on, and I think he's fantastic. But part of what I think is fascinating is he's an idiot in those in those like he's pretty good, but his like main assistant is an utter bumbling nincompoop.
Oh,
Um,
Otis.
what's his name?
Otis.
Otis, yes, Otis. And of course, all the stuff with him and Miss Tessmacher. So I would love to see more of those side characters explored in great ways.
Well, and that's another thing that when they revamped Superman in 1985, prior to that, Lex had been a mad scientist. That was his thing.
Right.
And actually, the fact that he's got this weird real estate scheme in the movies is a little, it's almost like a precursor to where he would go, because it was not until post crisis after 1985 that he became a businessman. And like
Oh, interesting. Okay.
before that, like he was a mad scientist, he was a known criminal, he was always breaking out of jail, everybody knew that he was a criminal, and they pivoted that it was a really big change to make him this respected figure who, like, they're constantly resetting it, they're constantly having
Yeah.
him be like, oh, I didn't do all those crimes, it was my clone. And they're like, oh, we're so sorry, Mr. Luthor, please
Right.
take back your billions of dollars and go back to your penthouse. And I think as every single year that has gone by since 1985, that has only become more relevant. And
Can we at least shut the door on him in a mecha suit? Because those are not my favorite Lex Luthors.
no.
I was
Yeah.
about to say, like, I don't think we've had a live action Luthor suit, right? The green and purple
Yeah, I don't think we have.
suit. And that's what I would want out of this movie. Like, and I think Nicholas Hoult is a kind of actor who could carry that physicality, even though like a lot of it would be CGI. Like he was Beast in the X-Men movies, so he's got some pedigree that would be more believable, I think, than a lot of other Luthors. Like Gene Hackman, you would never want to have in a suit in a
No,
match.
And I
no,
think
no.
I could see James Gunn going for it because he likes the most ridiculous elements. Like he really
Yeah.
embraces those, which I fully support that. I love that he does that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, with what we know from the trailer / cast, I don't think that there is another I mean, there are a couple of potentials, but it seems like Luthor is poised to be the final boss of this movie.
I mean, there is a dragon. Just putting that out there. Like, there's a giant lizard breathing fire. But yes, it's probably a tool of the antagonist. But there is a dragon in the movie, so.
Isn't Max Lord? Yeah, Max Lord is in this.
Oh, I saw that. So
Yeah,
Maxwell
Sean Gunn is
Lord,
paying him.
right? That's
playing
my
him.
issue. Is that I don't think the way that James uses his brother Sean, that he would be a main villain.
No, I agree. And
Fair.
also, he was the main villain in Wonder Woman 1984, and they might want to be like, let's not go back to that well so soon.
I was going to say, which is a criminal underusing of Pedro Pascal, and I would have loved to see him recast in this, but fair enough.
Oh, I thought he was good. Like, the movie was bad, but
Well,
I
that's
thought
what I mean is, like, he was really
perfect.
good in a really bad movie, but even
Yeah.
then his character was terribly written.
I mean, I'm also a Max Lord, like this one woman Max Lord defense squad, because he only became a villain, 21 years ago, but so yes, it was a long time ago, but I knew him before and he was my friend.
That's
and
fair.
I'm still bitter about it.
That's fair.
So as we're exploring
Can I say one other thing on Lex Luthor? And then
Sure.
go
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say on Lex Luthor is, and here's why I kind of don't like the mecha suit. For me, and granted, this I did come up with the Christopher Reeves, Gene Hackman, but in which I think one of I'd say is a very strong theme, but also I think it comes out in a lot of the comics pre-mecha suit, is that kind of going back to you before, Superman is the person who can outpunch anyone. And so Lex Luthor, at least as the evil genius, I loved as a villain because there's no question in the world that Superman can punch Lex Luthor in the face and win. Like, that's never a question. The problem is that Lex Luthor is always 5 steps ahead in a chess match, where if he does just punch him, he won't stop the missiles that are going to trigger this, they're going to trigger whatever in the Rothstein machine that's going to, cause it all to, Rube Goldberg machine, I'm sorry, it's going to make it all happen. And that, therefore, I love when he has to be Clark Kent, the journalist, to find out the secrets and figure it all out. And so that was just my argument for anti-mecha suit, is I really like the idea of Lex Luthor, who's always like, yeah, you can beat me up, Superman. That's never in question. The problem is, can you figure out my 8-level complicated plan?
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
But we'll see. Now, we do have a number of other great characters that this has gone into that, Riki, I know you wanted to jump into, so take us away.
Well, this is an area where I was a little disappointed or wary of the trailer, is that they show other members of the Justice League, presumably, in this universe. And I just want a good Superman film. And by showing us that, hey, there's a Justice League, they're in this movie, it just feels like another step in DC trying to play catch up with Marvel. After all their failed attempts in the past, saying, well, we need to get our Justice League movie and our DCU going quickly because we're still like several steps behind Marvel. So I just wanted a simple Superman movie, Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, but we get Guy Gardner, Green Lantern. There's a Hawk Girl in the trailer. I think I saw Mr. Terrific, but I'm not seeing him listed in the cast for some reason. But in the cast, I am seeing Rex Mason listed. So that's a lot of secondary hero characters to have in a Superman movie. And James Gunn in both DC and Marvel has done a good job with ensemble casts, but I don't want a Superman movie to have an ensemble cast, at least in the hero department. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am also wary for that same reason. My thoughts are exactly the same as yours. I am excited. I want to see these characters. I am a DC girl. I love the DC universe. I am so sad that so far DC has not really managed to build that kind of extended universe that allows us to see all these characters. Although, to be fair, they definitely did on the CW. There were billions of characters over there.
Yeah. They literally did Crisis on Infinite Earth with an episode on 5 different television shows.
Yeah, and which, I mean, there's something about that which is like so perfect because it's how these events play out in comics, where you have to like read all these different comics and
Yeah.
which goes back to what we started this episode talking about, which is that these stories maybe work better for television than for movies. But so like I'm happy to see all of these characters. Like Guy Gardner is my favorite Green Lantern. I am thrilled that he's here with his terrible hair. I think Nathan Fillion is having the most fun. Like I'm so excited for this. I love Metamorpho. I love Hawkgirl. Like I love Mr. Terrific. Like these are all characters I want to see, but I worry that they're gonna get in the way.
Yeah. So here's the one counter argument I'll make, and then I do want to talk about Bad Haircut Guy, because for me, as someone who the only real exposure to Green Lantern I've had is to Jon Stewart, I was very surprised that it wasn't Jon Stewart. And to be clear, I'm talking about the Jon Stewart Green Lantern, not the Daily Show former host, although him as a superhero would also be phenomenal. But I love the idea of the office rom-com that you're talking about that focuses more on Clark Kent. I've never really seen that on screen, so I don't have anything to compare it to. What I will say, though, is that I think my favorite Superman stories that I have seen on screen, with the exception of like, the Christopher Reeve that I just loved as a kid, is where it's Superman as a distinct contrast to most of the rest of the other heroes. Like I really like a Justice League where Batman is one extreme, Superman is another, and most of the heroes are somewhere in the middle, with each one kind of, aligning with different ones depending on, where they are. Not that they're fighting with each other, but they have different philosophies of how to approach the ethical issues of superheroes, which, shocking enough, is what I really care about. And I do really like the idea that, like, there's a moment that to me feels very Superman from the MCU, which is in the second Avengers movie, when they're like getting ready to like finally take on the heads of Hydra, and Captain America says language when someone says like damn or something like that. And I feel like that to me is very much a Superman kind of idea of like, he's going to be leading the heroes, he's going to be helping the heroes, but he's also like, keeping them in line to some extent, especially when some of them are maybe wandering a little more into vigilante status or self-serving or whatever it is. So I think to me, that's the idea of why I like having Superman along with a lot of other heroes. But I agree with you that like, if all we have is a 2.5 hour movie, which I wish we were back to 2 hour movies, but that's just the new length and, pain for the bladder on those of us who are older, but fair enough. Yeah, I think that's the argument I would make about why I want Superman in a movie with other heroes. But I agree with you that I don't think it has to be this first movie.
I get worried about that because I'm just speculating here. I don't know where things are going, but all of the superheroes that we do see besides Superman seem to have some kind of uniform going on, and I worry that they're going to be sort of like, not the bad guys, but like really misguided, or they're like all working for the man, or they're like all government agents, and Superman has to show them the error of their ways, and they're like, there's a scene where it looks like Guy is arresting Clark, or confronting him in some way, and for Guy, I'm willing to let him be a douchebag because he is a douchebag, and that's part of why I like him. But like, I don't want to bring in a bunch of superheroes to be like, look at them, they're terrible compared to Superman, because I love all of them.
No, that's fair. Yeah, like to me, it's very much like they're all good guys, but they have different philosophies, and Superman's maybe a bit more the Boy Scout than the rest of them, and that's different than he's doing it right and they're all doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So talk to me more about Guy Gardner. Because as I said, I was definitely surprised, because I think Jon Stewart is the dominant one in a lot of the Justice League stuff, which I think is one of the main things that people who haven't read the comics are probably influenced of, but also because, and just naming Hollywood realities, Jon Stewart is a black man. And the character's blackness isn't like, he's not Black Panther by any means, or Luke Cage, but his blackness is a part of who the character is. And comic book movies continue not to be the like biggest bastion of diversity in the world. So, and I'm not saying like they're wrong to not use the black character if they could have, but it definitely felt like a curious choice when, people are going to ask you how diverse you are and you had that option. Why do you think they did? Tell me more about Guy Gardner and why I should be happy that they made this choice.
Well, So the Green Lanterns, for anybody not familiar with them, they're basically space cops. So there are literally thousands of them. Obviously, there aren't that many who are important characters,
Right.
but there are, I
It's the
think
Green
at this
Lantern
point,
Corps, right?
the Green Lantern Corps, yes. I think there are like 9 of them from Earth these days, and that's not counting Alan Scott, the first Green Lantern, who isn't part of the Corps because the writers hadn't invented it yet. So the sort of iconic Green Lantern historically is Hal Jordan, who's been around since 1959, and he's the one that Ryan Reynolds played in the unfortunate 2011 movie. Then Guy Gardner was brought in a few years after that as a very, very minor character. As sort of an alternate, like if anything happened to Hal, Guy was there. And he really developed a personality, again, during the 80s. It all comes back to the 80s as sort of this like brash asshole. Like he is a bully and he's rude and he's misogynistic and he's xenophobic and he hates commies and I'll never shut up about it. And he was a comic relief character. Like that was the point. It was a joke about like this kind of swaggering macho male lead that was common at the time. And then from that point, the character gradually got more and more nuance added to him. And he's a much more complex character now, but he does have that very abrasive quality, and he's funny. He's still best as a comic relief character. And I think that more than anything else is why James Gunn cast him, because James Gunn likes to do, or cast and picked him because he likes to do comedy and he wanted to give his buddy Nathan a role, and it fit.
That's fair.
Jon Stewart was introduced in 1971, and very specifically, his creators, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, wanted to introduce a Black Green Lantern. They wanted to introduce a Black hero. DC basically didn't have any Black heroes, and then they very, very quickly added like 5 of them between like 69 and 71. And Jon Stewart, depending on how you count it, is their first actual Black superhero because he's the first one to have a code name and a costume. Yeah, so Jon Stewart became a much more prominent character thanks to the Justice League cartoon, where he was chosen because they wanted the cartoon to not be an all-white cast, and he became one of the best known characters. I'm certainly not saying he shouldn't have been in this movie. I will note that there is going to be the Green Lanterns TV show, and he is one of the main characters, along with Hal. I think the choice was just made to use Guy Gardner for the comic relief. And they also have Mr. Terrific, Michael Hoult, in this movie, who is Black. And I think, like, obviously Black superheroes are not interchangeable, but I think that was more of their, like, we want to make sure this is not an all-white lineup.
Well, knowing there's going to be more Green Lantern content with Jon Stewart, as you said, having him be not here's the Green Lantern you're going to care about going forward, but here's an imbecile that you're going to have fun laughing at as part of the show, but that also introduces the idea that the Green Lantern Corps exists. That makes total sense.
Yeah. I know, Riki, you were
sold
on the Guy thing.
No, I'm sold on Guy in this movie. I actually agree. I think I would rather have Guy Gardner in this movie than Jon Stewart for a lot of the reasons that you just said, Jessica. And if I could summarize it, it would be that I don't think Guy Gardner is a main character, whereas I think Jon Stewart is a main character. He is gonna, I think, with all these things, like, we don't know if they're actually gonna get made, but I think Lanterns is looking good to get made, because they have cast Aaron Pierre as Jon Stewart. Matthew, he's the main actor in the Rebel Ridge movie that I've been telling you about.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So he's got that. He's got the swag to be Jon Stewart, to be a main character. And if he were in this, I think I would be very disappointed. Like, I just want Guy Gardner to get punched by whatever the main bad person is in this, and like have a bloody nose, and like Nathan Fillion can play that character perfectly.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm here for the hammer. Come down.
Matthew, this may sell you. The most famous, iconic scene that Guy Gardner has ever experienced in his entire career is getting punched in the face by Batman.
I'm in. I mean, that sounds just perfect then. So
just Google Guy Gardner One Punch.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, and like Jon Stewart has like some actual very interesting emotional solo stories associated with him that I hope that the TV show would utilize some of. It's also gonna have Hal Jordan, so we'll have to see like what the balance is between those two, whether they're partners or whether they alternate their storylines and whatnot. But I like Guy as a character, but I think of the 4 traditional Earth Green Lanterns, to me, like he's the least able to carry a story on his own.
Yeah, 100%.
With the fourth being gosh, I'm blanking on his name.
Rayner.
Yeah, Kyle, who you may be familiar with the term fridging. That actually originated from his storyline, where his girlfriend was killed by his opponent.
Got it.
And placed in a fridge.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, her decapitated and her head placed there.
Oh no, whole body.
Oh really? I've always heard that it's her head. Okay. There we go.
It's yeah. What was that? The 90s?
It's awful either way, but it's important.
It was the 90s. It was like 94, 95.
How very edgy.
Exactly.
Which, I'll be honest, that's the thing. I love edginess in superheroes, but we've had it so much. I'm very okay with some rounded edges with my Superman this time around. And that sounds like maybe that's what we're going to get. So,
yeah, well, I think this is gonna be a very wholesome Superman. Again, like we've only seen bits and pieces, but David Cornsweet, the actor, I watched a TV show with him. I can't remember what it was called, but I literally was like, this guy should play Superman. And then I like Googled it and I was like, oh, he's already cast.
Yep.
But then like I think the thing that impressed me the most in this trailer for him specifically was his Clark Kent scenes. Like he did look the part of the bumbling, like unassuming guy. And I feel like they may have put him in a suit that's like too big for him, like intentionally, to make him look smaller.
Oh, that's really smart.
Yeah.
And it just looks good.
It makes him look smaller and it makes him look less cool and less self-assured.
Yeah.
I saw a quote from him where he was saying that part of his inspiration for the character's body language as Clark was his brother-in-law, who is 6'5" and like big and is always trying to not be in the way. And it comes through so perfectly in those few scenes that we get.
Well, I like that because again, like this isn't even political, it's more cultural, but just placing it in the conversation. Like I think one of the ideas that's most debated right now in our culture and that is essential to any conversation about superheroes is masculinity. And what does a masculine role model look like? And I'm really excited to have, I think Superman often gets put on lists of like non-toxic ideas of masculinity, and that kind of like, yes, I have all this size, but I'm not here to take up space and to claim my authority. I'm here to try and make space for others. Seems really important for that. I don't want us to go too much longer because we're coming up on an hour. But Jessica, I do want to give you a chance to talk about the name that I've not heard you say yet that I know is so essential, Lois Lane. What do we know about Lois Lane?
I was just thinking that when you were talking about like masculinity and gender roles, I was like, we haven't talked about Lois. We really don't get a lot of her in the trailer. Like we see her, looking at Clark in the office, and there's a bit with them flying and kissing, and that's great. I like it when she is looking at him in the office and kissing him. I do think that the casting is really good. I think anybody
who is playing her?
It's Rachel Brosnahan from The Marvelous Miss Maisel, and anyone who can talk that fast. I mean, that's the biggest hurdle to overcome with a Lois. I'm hopeful. I do think, by and large, we tend to get pretty solid Loises in adaptations, more so like sometimes I think all the actors have been good across the board. Yeah. Both Clark and Lois, but I think the writing with Lois doesn't fall into the same pitfalls that the writing for Clark does. So I feel good about this. I'm excited. I love Lois. I was saying to somebody the other day, in the comic stories, the two characters who are always on the right side of history whenever like the superheroes are fighting each other, or like you're in a dystopian universe where superheroes are evil or outlawed or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Any of these, the two characters who are always on the right side of history, Green Arrow and Lois Lane. This is not necessarily a thing that we've seen with adaptations of Green Arrow so far. So
No.
we won't talk about that. But like Lois Lane is in some ways even more than Superman, like a beacon of what is true and righteous.
Right.
And I hope she gets to be difficult and messy and eviscerate people who are getting in her way, and
In a different way.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so vital. And there was some other episode we've done. I don't remember which one, because we've had Jessica on talk about Superman a lot for clearly very good reasons, because you're an authority and have so much great to say. But there's one in which you described Lois as, because I was saying, like, does Lois hit into like negative stereotypes of the damsel in distress? And I'm not going to exactly quote you, I don't remember the exact words. What you basically said was that she's not a damsel in distress. She's just a person who already was a like, damn the torpedoes, I'm going to do what I think is right. And now has just developed this ridiculous sense of overconfidence of, I don't care what stupid risks I take because this guy in a cape is always going to save me. So I'm going to do anything and everything to get the story, and who cares what happens, you know? And
I mean, she's right.
yeah. And like it can look like a damsel in distress if you're not actually paying attention, but it really is so different. And I hope that, again, this movie captures that attitude.
Yeah. I mean, there's the bit in, I think it might only be in the Donner edit of Superman 2. I can't remember, where she jumps out the window because she's like, Superman will save me. And he does. Yeah. And then there's also the scene where she dives into Niagara Falls, which I think is in the final edit of the movie. I don't remember. She's jumping out of a lot of windows to prove a lot of things. It happens on My Adventures with Superman too. It is not, I mean, it is foolhardiness, and I kind of like that, but it is also absolute confidence, both in her abilities, including her own mind. Like, she knows that she's figured this out right. She knows that she's read Superman right. She knows what he will do, and she's right. And it's also total faith in him.
Right. And it's not in the like, I have my big strong boyfriend who'll save me. It's very much like, my underlings are going to make my coffee just right. My underlings are going to drive me where I need to go, and my underlings are going to save me when I fall out a window.
Jimmy gets her coffee, and Clark catches her. Those are their jobs.
I love it. Any other last things that you want to say before we're going to go into some bonus member content? We're going to talk a little bit about some other stuff coming up next year. Jessica's just written an article over on Book Riot that we will link you guys to and give you a chance to check out, but also we'll talk about that. Also, of course, if you want to become a member, it's only $5 a month, $55 a year. We're talking about all sorts of new things we're going to start doing for members, including having your own bonus bonus episodes, full episodes only for members. We're going to start with the first one this month. So that's going to be happening. Of course, you get ad-free episodes, all other kind of great things. But before we do that, Riki, first, any other last things you want to say about this Superman trailer and this movie coming out?
Yeah, I scrolled way down the cast list, and I found a character listed that Jessica mentioned earlier, Eve Tessmacher, which is an interesting choice. A very Gunnian choice, if you will. Because I think this is Lex Luthor's female assistant, and I feel like most modern incarnations of Luthor have Mercy, the bodyguard valet, sometimes like replacement CEO of LexCorp. So using Tessmacher is an interesting choice. I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very James Gunn choice.
Yeah, because Tessmacher is like Mercy is all things you listed. Tessmacher is Ms. Tessmacher is much more like the 1950s secretary type.
Yeah,
at least from what I know.
Yeah, and like she and Otis will often turn up in the comics these days as sort of Easter eggs. They're not really like characters who do a lot of stuff, but like, you know, if Lex is barking orders at somebody off panel, it's one of them. Or like there might be like
Where's the secret warehouse where Lex has the doomsday device? Oh, it's on Otis Street. Like there's a lot of
Right.
throwaway references
Yeah.
like that, but you
And
don't see them in adaptations anymore. Really.
And for me specifically, it's that she's listed, but I can't find a casting for a Mercy. So it's like that seems like a deliberate choice between the two.
Oh, interesting. Well, that'd be nice because I mean the main thing I know her from is the Christopher Reeve Donner movies, in which I would say she does not come out very well. She instead she's like, oh, Superman's really cute, and my mother might. I think she's got like an aunt in California who's going to die in Lex Luthor's plan, and so she winds up betraying Lex to Superman and helps rescue him. And it's cute, but it also seems motivated a lot by the fact that Christopher Reeves is a not bad looking guy, which I just felt like let's do a little more of the character. So
yeah,
that'd be fun. All right. Well, with that, thank you both so much. I've learned a lot. Audience, I hope you've learned a lot. We'd love to hear what you think. Let us know your thoughts for the coming movie. We'll definitely have Jessica back when the movie comes out. But till then, thank you so much. We have spoken.